The 11 o'clock count. I took the night shift at Harrow Logistics because it paid $4 more an hour. And honestly, I didn't sleep much anyway. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My job was simple. Watch a warehouse the size of 3 football fields, while absolutely nothing happened. Every hour I'd walk the floor, log the temperature in the cold storage bay, make sure the loading doors were sealed, and report anything unusual. Nothing ever looked wrong. That was the whole appeal. The warehouse sat at the edge of an industrial park outside town, surrounded by gravel lots and sodium lights that buzzed instead of glowed. Inside, the shelving stretched 4 stories high. Steel ladders were bolted to the racks, and somewhere in the distance the compressor for the cold storage bay kept time like a slow, tired heartbeat. I actually liked the silence. After my divorce, after everything that year, silence was the only thing that didn't ask anything from me. The trouble started during my 3rd week, and like most bad things, it started small. Not with a bang, just with something that didn't make sense. The first night, I noticed a pallet had been moved. Not stolen, not damaged, just moved. About 6 feet to the left of where the manifest said it belonged, in aisle 14. I figured the day crew had shifted it before leaving and forgot to update the paperwork. No big deal. The next night, 2 pallets in the same aisle had completely switched places. I checked the security logs. Nobody had badged into aisle 14 after 6 p.m. I checked the cameras. Nothing. Just an empty aisle, hour after hour. Exactly as it should have been. I kept telling myself the day shift was just sloppy. I told myself a lot of things that week. By the 2nd week, I started changing the timing of my patrols. Not because I thought something was wrong. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I was just bored. So instead of walking at the top of every hour, I'd go 20 minutes late, then 40 minutes late, then right on the hour again, just to mix things up. That's when I noticed something. The pallets only moved on the hours I skipped. Want to be precise about this, because for a while, being precise was the only thing keeping me from wondering if I was losing my mind. I never actually saw anything move. Not once. That's the part people always get wrong when I tell this story. They imagine boxes sliding across the floor or shadows creeping through the aisles. It wasn't like that. Every time I looked, everything was perfectly still. It was only later that I'd realize something had changed. It felt less like watching something happen and more like walking into a room after someone had quietly rearranged it while you were gone. A stack of boxes that had been facing one direction would suddenly be turned another. A ladder I'd leaned against the east wall would somehow be 2 aisles over. One night, I found a handful of packing peanuts arranged into a perfect little triangle in the middle of the concrete floor. I actually stood there for a minute trying to think of a logical explanation before sweeping them aside. When I came back an hour later, they were gone, and I know I never picked them up. I finally called my supervisor, Denny. Denny answered every phone call like you'd interrupted the most important moment of his life. I explained everything as calmly as I could. He barely let me finish. "The building's old," he said. "Stuff shifts, highway vibrations. You're overthinking it." Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned I was the 3rd night guard that year to complain about aisle 14. The 2nd one had quit before making it a month. He never explained why the first one stayed. Looking back, that should have been enough for me. I should have walked out that night. I want that on record. By week 3, I knew something inside that warehouse wasn't behaving the way buildings are supposed to behave. But rent doesn't care if you're scared. And if I'm being honest, there was another reason. Part of me wanted to catch it. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. So, one Tuesday in October, I bought one of those cheap trail cameras hunters strap to trees. Motion activated. Infrared. recorded everything onto a memory card. I mounted it high on a support beam overlooking aisle 14, where the warehouse cameras always seemed to have problems. Then I acted like it was just another shift. Around 2 in the morning, I skipped my walk through. By then, I'd stopped pretending I was checking that aisle every hour. Instead, I sat in the guard booth with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before midnight, staring at the clock and trying not to look nervous over absolutely nothing. At exactly 3:14, my radio clicked. Not a voice, just click. I froze. There wasn't anyone else in the building. I was carrying the only radio. Every instinct told me to go check. For once, I listened to the part of me that said, don't. Instead, I watched the security monitors, all 14 camera feeds. For a full minute, nothing happened. Nothing moved. Nothing flickered. Then, at exactly 3:17, only the camera covering aisle 14 dissolved into static. Not the whole system, just that one screen. 4 seconds. That's all. When the picture returned, a pallet sitting near the back of the aisle had somehow turned 90 degrees. No forklift, no person, nothing. Just different. The next morning, I pulled the memory card from my trail camera. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. It had taken 11 pictures overnight. The first 10 showed exactly what you'd expect: an empty warehouse, dust drifting through the infrared light. Nothing else. The 11th photo was taken at 3:17:02. The aisle looked completely normal, except there was a long streak across the middle of the lens, low, perfectly deliberate. Not dust, not moisture. It looked exactly like someone had slowly dragged the palm of their hand across the camera. I quit that morning. Didn't argue, didn't leave a report, didn't even call Denny. I set my badge on the guard desk, walked out, got in my car, rolled every window down, even though it was October, and drove until I stopped feeling like I was going to throw up. For months, I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a raccoon had gotten into the warehouse. Animals knock things over. Maybe the radio picked up interference from a truck driver's CB out on the highway. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I just needed sleep. Those explanations were enough. At least they let me sleep. Then, last spring, I happened to drive past Harrow Logistics on my way to a job interview. The warehouse was still there. Same building, same buzzing lights, different company name on the sign. As I drove by, I glanced toward the front office. There was an employee schedule taped inside the window. Same layout we used when I worked there. Same 11 to 7 night shift. Only this one wasn't filled in. Someone had circled the overnight shift 3 separate times with a thick red marker. Not crossed it out, not labeled. Just circled. I kept driving. I never stopped to ask what it meant. Some questions don't need answers. Sometimes getting close enough is more than